Chapter 21. Craftsman Protection Association. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He explained. Seeing that Matthew did not have the intention to argue with him, he heaved a sigh of relief. It's still an oak seed, isn't it? That's right, growth green liquid is out of stock. The druid from before is missing, and I haven't found a new source of stock for it. Jeff was a traveling merchant. He wandered between Rolling Stone Town and Guardian Highland, selling the specialties of both places for a living. The price of his goods was fair, but his hands and feet were not clean. He was caught stealing several times. The last time he was arrested, he should have been sentenced. It was Matthew who found Blake to help him. At that time, Jeff was so grateful that he expressed that he would never steal again. However, Matthew did not trust him. If it were not for the fact that there were very few merchants coming and going to the Guardian Highlands, and the oak seeds he needed were only available to the druids there, he would not have interceded for him. As usual, he picked up 2 small bags of seeds. Matthew flipped through it and frowned. The quality of these seeds isn't very good. Is that so? No way. Jeff was a little nervous. I told them that I wanted the best seed. The fat man told me that this was from the Druid Church and that the quality was definitely excellent. Damn it, I knew that humans' words couldn't be trusted. Matthew shook his head. He had already stepped into the oak tree domain, so he could naturally sense it clearly. These seeds were full of vitality on the surface. However, its interior seemed to have been violently destroyed by a force. Less than 1/10 of the seedlings would sprout. The quality of the seeds was on a completely different level from the ones Jeff had provided previously. You bought it from a human merchant in the Guardian Highlands. Matthew pondered. Yes, I just told you. The druid from before is missing. There seems to be some trouble in the forest over there. Matthew, don't tell me you don't want this batch of goods. Then I might really have to go back to my old job. Jeff said with a long face. Matthew glanced at him rudely. Suit yourself, but no one will care about you if you get caught next time. Even so, Matthew still accepted the goods at a price 20% lower than the market price. After all, no one in Rolling Stone Town would buy oak seeds except him. This was the first time that Jeff had made a mistake. The next time you go to buy seeds, you must find the local druids. The humans there are no different from us. It's too common to pass off inferior ones as good ones. Matthew warned after the deal was over. I understand. Unfortunately, I can't tell the quality of the seeds. But there's news about the book called Germination, Jeff said regretfully. If you need it, I'll buy that spell book directly next time. Matthew nodded. The druid's germination spell could speed up the sprouting of seeds. Mastering this spell would greatly increase the efficiency of planting trees. After all, the steps of planting trees were closely linked. If one segment were affected, the overall efficiency would drop. Oh, right. Matthew was about to leave, but he suddenly remembered Jeff's dark history, so he asked, do you know how to pick locks? Yes, but I haven't done it for a long time. Jeff replied. Can you open this lock? Matthew handed over the psalm. Jeff took the spell book, knocked on the steel lock, listened for a while, and then shook his head. I'm afraid not. This is a compound lock. I definitely can't open it with my skills. But I can find an axe to help you split it. Axe. What a joke. In that case, the spells recorded in the book would most likely be destroyed. No thanks. Matthew calmly put away the spellbook. Jeff looked at the silver book reluctantly. Why don't you try the Craftsman Protection Association? They also have locksmiths there. Craftsman Protection Association. Matthew knew that there was such an existence in Rolling Stone Town, but he was not familiar with it. His wooden house was built by someone recommended by Blake, so he did not put too much effort into it. Yes, an organization led by Mr. Richard. It is said to protect the legitimate rights and interests of craftsmen. Many carpenters, stonemasons, and workshop workers are members of the association. Mr. Richard is a real gentleman, isn't he? Jeff said admiringly. He was one of the few members of the committee of 5 who was willing to do practical things, and the craftsmen loved him. The association building is north of the craftsman area. You should know the way, right? He thanked Jeff for his suggestion. Matthew struggled through a pile of tomatoes, spinach, and pig manure. In the market, there seemed to be more and more people. The Craftsman Protection Association's building was deserted, forming a sharp contrast with the trade area. Matthew followed the receptionist to the locksmith's office on the second floor. The door was open. Dong dong dong. He knocked on the door and looked inside. There was only a man in his 30s in the office. The man was dressed like a gentleman, sitting upright and reading a thick book. Mr. Richard. Matthew was a little surprised. I thought this was where the locksmiths gathered. Richard put down the book and joked, so, is it not Mr. Matthew? The man who is only one step away from becoming an outstanding citizen. Please come in. You're right. This is indeed the locksmith's room, but they're all at the trade area now. It's the spring festival, you know. Matthew nodded slightly. He was about to leave. Do you need someone to unlock something? Richard suddenly asked. Matthew nodded. What kind of lock is it? Household or? Richard asked hesitantly. Matthew simply took out the defensive psalm. The compound lock of a magic book. Richard's eyes were very vicious. Did you accidentally lose the key? Matthew said frankly, it's not that complicated. It's just that I'm its new owner. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Then, he maintained this position for a long time. Matthew was a little puzzled. After a long time. Then, he stammered, bring it over. I'll help you open it. Matthew handed the book over without hesitation. Richard had a good reputation in the town, so he wasn't worried that Richard would steal his spellbook. However, the other party's behavior was indeed a little strange. Could it be that he's an amateur in the art of lockpicking, but he's not skilled enough and is afraid that I'll blame him if he breaks it? Matthew thought. Richard's fingertips had just touched the steel lock of the defensive psalm. However, he heard a "pa" sound. The lock actually opened automatically. In the office. It was quiet. What? Your lock was originally unlocked. You sure are careless, Mr. Matthew. Richard said with a smile. Matthew stared at him silently. Half a minute later. Maybe it was just luck. It seems to have opened by itself. A trace of regret flashed in Richard's eyes. Matthew was still organizing his reply when Richard said, Then, I suppose I'm your lucky charm. How about you treat me to a drink at Green Vine Bar? All right. Matthew replied. Then, he glanced at the system notification. Observation. Richard has used omnipotent hands to open the defensive psalm for you. Remark. Omnipotent hands, Tier 5 thief ability. Able to unlock 95% of physical locks and 60% of magic locks below Tier 5. Chapter 22. Hidden talent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Omnipotent hands, Tier 5 ability. Matthew's eyelids twitched. This meant that the elegant gentleman in front of him had at least level 17 in his profession. Furthermore, it was the rogue profession that was extremely difficult to master. No wonder he could appear behind him without warning the last time they met. At that time, Matthew thought it was that Bina's confession had distracted him. What's wrong? When he walked out of the association building, Richard seemed to notice Matthew's absent-minded expression. Matthew shook his head. He looked at the celebratory crowd that was squeezing in from the neighboring district. In the crowd, there was a young man dressed exaggeratedly, walking on stills. He kept swaying left and right, greeting the pedestrians on both sides. His movements were extremely clumsy, as if he could fall at any moment. "Nothing, I'm just a little emotional. Rolling Stone Town is really full of hidden talents," Matthew said as he looked at the young man who was standing on his legs. "Isn't that so?" Richard smiled and made way for the two playing children. Then, he turned around and glanced at Matthew. After all, a bone dragon is not something an ordinary person can control. Green Vine Bar. In a booth near the corner of the back door, the young bartender happily served the drinks. "Hello, 2 cups of pig-eating wine. Today is the spring festival. Old Barry will give everyone a cup of sparkling sweet water for free." Richard elegantly took a sip of the light green wine. Then, he said to Matthew, "I still remember the first time I came here. I didn't know what a wonderful alcoholic drink, pig-eating wine, was. When old Bill recommended it to me, I thought he was teasing a foreigner like me." Matthew also raised his wooden cup and took a sip. This was a specialty of Rolling Stone Town. The origin of its name was unknown, but the taste was spicy and memorable. This was because a type of seasonal weed was needed to make pig wine. Therefore, it could only be tasted around the spring festival every year. Matthew did not reply to Richard. He was still thinking about Richard's intentions. "It was fully by chance that I went to the Craftsman Protection Association to find a thief, so Richard couldn't have predicted that. So, was this just a coincidence? Or did he plan to get in touch with me, so he just took advantage of the situation?" No matter what the situation was, it was not a good thing to be targeted by a Tier 5 bandit. Fortunately, Richard did not show any hostility. Matthew also believed that he was doing the right thing. There should be nothing to be afraid of. The two of them chatted for a while. Perhaps a portion of the people from the market and the celebration had scattered over. The tavern gradually became lively. Richard suddenly asked Matthew with interest, "That girl, did she write to you after she went to Jade Court?" Bina. The tense Matthew instantly recalled the girl who confessed to him at his door that day. "No." Matthew shook his head. He thought for a moment and added, "It has only been half a month. She might have just arrived at Jade Court and hasn't settled down yet." Richard smiled. "You don't have to defend her. I'm just curious about your attitude toward her. As far as I know, you're very popular with female students, but why do I feel that you don't like them very much?" Matthew denied, "No, the girls are all very energetic and cute." Richard asked curiously, "Then why do you always reject their confessions?" "I heard Bina wasn't the first." Matthew explained seriously, "Just like I told Bina, they don't know the real me. They are still a group of children. They might like me because my identity as a teacher gives me the opportunity to gain their admiration easily. It could also be because having an older boyfriend would make her feel vain among her peers. It might even be because the taboo relationship between teachers and students had stimulated their rebellious hearts. In short, there could be many factors behind their confessions. However, it could not be because of love. And I've always treated them equally. They were my students, a group of innocent children who were still growing up. That was all." Richard suddenly asked, "Including Sif?" Matthew answered without hesitation, "Including Sif, Bedodem, all right, chatting with you is really boring." Richard looked helpless. "Hey, Matthew, your popularity with the girls would be something to brag about. If it were anyone else, they would have told the whole town. But you're actually seriously explaining to me why you didn't accept those girls' confessions." Matthew said seriously, "I thought this was something very serious that I needed to clarify. Of course, it's important. At least our Lord should be able to sleep well tonight. I'll pass on your words to Rieger." Richard yawned. Matthew was suddenly enlightened. "So you're the Lord's?" Richard shook its head. "No, it was just a coincidence. Your spellbook reminded me of some of my experiences when I was young, and then I couldn't help myself. Of course, Rieger has also talked to me about it, but I have already retired for many years. I am not interested in you or your bone dragon. Today is the spring festival. Let's have another drink. It's on me. Richard seemed to have lost the mood to talk. But this time, Matthew took the initiative to say, so that night, when Sif was kidnapped, you would have solved the problem even if I didn't do anything. Chapter 23. Hidden Talent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Richard spread his hands. Don't think that I'm so powerful, Matthew. I'm just a retired old man. The person who attacked us was an evil priest. Of course, he wouldn't be my match in a 1-on-1 fight, but I didn't know any spells. I couldn't find their location through magic like Zeller, nor could I rush to the scene of the incident as quickly as you could to save the damsel in distress. Do you understand? So I want to thank you on behalf of Sif. After all, this world belonged to wizards. When he said the last sentence, his tone was a little lonely, and his eyes were filled with memories. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. After a while, the busy bartender hurriedly served 2 more glasses of pig-eating wine. Richard was about to take the cup. Suddenly, his body movement stopped there, but his eyes glanced at the door. Matthew followed his gaze. 2 seconds later, the door of the tavern was pushed open. 2 figures, one tall and one short, walked in side by side. Matthew's pupils contracted. Even though the other party's face had been modified, he recognized that this was the duo who had passed through the oak forest last night. The 2 of them entered the tavern and looked around. Can't they see us? Matthew was surprised to find that the short man with a vigilant expression quickly shifted his gaze away from the corner booth. It was as if there was no one sitting in the booth. A moment later, the short man found a convenient spot to observe and sat down. The tall man started to get close to the bartender. Those are 2 gang members from 2 big cities. They are inquiring about a high-level druid who doesn't exist. Richard calmly grabbed the glass and took a sip. Looking for you. Matthew said frankly, yes, on the night I saved Sif, I killed an arsonist. Arsonist. Strange. Richard narrowed his eyes. These maggots that live in the sewers of the city actually left their territory. Matthew said, they might have been bewitched by the Order of Calamity. Richard thought for a moment. The Order of Calamity. Never heard of it. Matthew shrugged. Could it be an evil organization that has emerged in recent years? Other than that, I know that they seem to be members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood. Richard nodded and said, I know about that. The Silver Frost Brotherhood is a criminal organization active in Eastern countries. They have mastered the arsonist profession, and among the higher-ups of the organization, there is even a notorious, legendary profession called Red-Letter Hunter. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Is this organization very famous? Richard answered, it's a little notorious. Most of the members of this organization are wanted in major cities, including Ji-Lu City, Baiyan City, Guardian Highland, and Jade Court. Jade Court, in particular, placed a high bounty on the members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood because of a murder that targeted a wood elf village many years ago. Matthew suggested, I'm sure our Lord would want to capture these hooligans from Silver Frost Brotherhood. It's the spring festival today. Letting them come and go freely in the crowd will probably pose a hidden danger to public security. Do you want to take action? He knew that it was unlikely. However, he also wanted to see the actual combat situation of a high-level bandit. As expected, Richard shook his head and said, I'm retired. I'm only a civilian now. Moreover, the people who will deal with them are on their way. About 30 seconds later, a row of fully armed guards filed in from the gate. The leader was Blake, who was holding a short sword. Let's go. As soon as the soldiers entered the door, the short Dean jumped up from the stool. Bang bang bang. With a few crisp sounds, before the customers in the hall could react, thick black smoke and raging flames rushed out from several corners. The hall was in chaos. Through the back door. Dean grabbed Mobley, who was slow to react. The two pushed away the panicked customers and quickly crossed the hall to the back door. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. He did not know how the garrison team discovered them, but he knew very well that he must not get entangled with these fully armed soldiers in a narrow space. Even if he stabbed the other party with all of his might, he probably wouldn't be able to cause any dents in the other party's armor. However, as long as they left the tavern and entered the complex neighborhood, they would enter their home ground. Arsonists were never afraid of chaotic street battles, even if they were outnumbered. Moreover, it was the spring festival today. As long as they went out of the back door, they would have an endless stream of people as cover and countless invisible hostages. The two of them arrived at the back door under the cover of the thick smoke. Dean looked back. Very good. The hall was in chaos. Even the garrison member at the front was more than 10 steps away from him. This distance is perfect. Dean looked fierce. He took out 2 bottles of orange-red potion from his inventory and prepared to smash them. But at this moment, he suddenly felt his feet slip, and his entire body suddenly spun and fell forward. He instinctively wanted to throw away the 2 bottles of explosive potion. However, just as he was leaning forward, the 2 bottles of medicine had disappeared without a trace. What's the situation? Dean fell forward to the floor in shock and fury. Bang! Bang! He heard 2 heavy objects hitting the floor. Before he could react to what had happened, a strong garrison soldier had already used his knee to press down on his spine. He suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe. Clang! Another team member skillfully put heavy shackles on the 2 people who had fallen to the ground. Gentlemen, Rolling Stone Town does not welcome any members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood, but our prison welcomes you. Blake said righteously. Only then did he notice the 2 people in the booth next to him. Mr. Richard and Matthew. Was it you? Oh, I understand. I was wondering why the 2 of them suddenly collapsed. Blake was enlightened. Then, he winked at Matthew with an expression that said, "Don't worry, I'll keep it a secret for you." Matthew quickly explained, "It wasn't me." However, his words were mercilessly interrupted by Richard. "That's right. He did it. Good job, Matthew. I didn't know you had such skills." As he spoke, he raised his glass. "To spring, I hope that the weather will be good this year and that everything will be peaceful." Then, he stood up and walked away with his gentleman's cane. When he passed by the 2 arsonists, Richard deliberately stopped. He smiled at the confused duo who had fallen to the ground and said, "Welcome to Rolling Stone Town." Matthew looked at this and was speechless. Observation. Richard used Stumbling Block to take down the arsonists Dean and Mobley successfully. Stumbling Block. Tier 5 Thief ability. Able to take down any target and temporarily seal all their abilities. Hint. You have obtained 2 explosive potions. Matthew lowered his head in shock. At this moment, only then did he realize that there were 2 bottles of orange-red potion in the right pocket of his shirt. A high-level thief is so terrifying. Matthew was shocked. Because today was the spring festival. Matthew deliberately stayed at his home in town for dinner. Putting aside her tall and fierce skeleton appearance, Peggy actually had the soul of a good wife and mother. For dinner, there was garlic roasted red sausage, honey-roasted chicken, croissants, salad with kale and strawberries, mushroom fried noodles, spinach egg soup, and special snacks from the spring festival. Matthew was very satisfied. After dinner, he meditated in the basement for a while. It was not until late at night that he packed his things and rushed out of town. He had planned to spend the night at home. However, tonight was coincidentally a full moon night. Matthew decided to try the Moonlight Society's admission ticket he possessed. Midnight. Following the guidance of the moonlight, he came to the center of the oak forest and began to call the fairy princess' name softly. Even if he had an entrance ticket, he would need the help of a nature soul to enter that strange space that only druids could enter. Coincidentally, Lulu, the leader of the oak tree fairies, was a nature soul. Chapter 24. Extraordinary Charm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lulu was an overly shy fairy. The other fairies living in this oak forest had more or less greeted Matthew. Only this princess was always secretive. Even when she appeared in front of Matthew, she would hide among the fairies so that he could not see her clearly. It would be a lie to say that he was not curious about Lulu. However, Matthew had always respected these little creatures who got along well with him. After summoning the fairy princess, Matthew closed his eyes. A cool breeze brushed past his face. There was a moment. Matthew vaguely felt that a fairy had stopped on his nose and was boldly walking up and down. This feeling quickly disappeared. Matthew thought that it was his imagination. He did not think that it was the fairy princess teasing him. After all, she was too shy. "I am here." A thin and weak voice drifted over from afar. Matthew could sense that she had stopped on a tree 5 steps away from him. "Good evening. I need your help. I have an entrance ticket to the Moonlight Society. Only with the help of a nature soul can I enter the corresponding interdimensional space." Matthew waved the ticket in his hand. "This is not a difficult matter." Lulu's voice drifted closer. "Why are you closing your eyes, Matthew?" Matthew smiled lightly and said, "If you allow me to open them, I will." I trust you, Matthew." Lulu's voice was hesitant at first. But soon, she mustered up her courage and said, "You can open your eyes now." Matthew opened his eyes naturally. At first, it was a faint glow under the moonlight. Then, he saw a pair of golden wings. Finally, there was a fairy that was slightly larger than ordinary fairies and that inconceivably exquisite face. At that moment, Matthew felt his head buzzing. His eyes widened subconsciously. Whoosh! Lulu flew back 20 feet nervously. Then, she hesitantly inched closer to Matthew. "Who?" Matthew let out a long breath and woke up from his loss of composure. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to be so beautiful." He laughed at himself and said, "Did my eyes pop out just now?" Lulu patted her fair chest with her small hand. "You did well, but that gaze just now did scare me." Matthew nodded. He finally understood why Lulu didn't easily appear in front of others. Perhaps it was not because she was shy. It was because of her unmatched beauty. "What is your charm?" Matthew asked. 20 points. Or perhaps more. "I don't know either." Lulu counted with her fingers. 20 points meant extraordinary charm. This was the limit of charm that ordinary creatures could reach. That was not counting the charm bonus unique to fairies. Almost all creatures would be tempted to get close to Lulu, grab her, or even toy with her. Even Matthew could not help but have evil thoughts when he stared at those small wings for a long time. "You resisted the enchantment of the fairy princess, passive, willpower +1, then can we start?" Matthew tried hard to look away and asked. "Of course." Lulu circled Matthew excitedly. "This is the first time I've come into such close contact with a creature other than my clansman. This feeling is so exciting." "Right, you were talking about the Moonlight Society." "No problem. Come with me, Matthew." As she spoke, her shadow danced in the moonlight. Matthew strolled along. After a while, the admission ticket in his hand suddenly disappeared. The singing of nature's soul awakened the young oak forest. Matthew felt as if there were friendly gazes on him. Lulu stopped on the trunk of a tall oak tree. Matthew walked closer to take a look. There was a pale green secret door on the tree wall. He pushed the door open and entered. The majestic greenery greeted them. Hint. You have entered the kingdom of the goddess of moon, Asha, the half. Domain, Moonlight Woodland. This was the home of the spirits of nature. They hated evil and rejected outsiders. They were willing to maintain a friendly relationship with the druids. This is also the shelter of the Moonlight's blessed. Every traveler who walks under the moonlight can pray to Asha. If they receive a response, they can temporarily stay here to avoid the monsters hidden in the long night. The air was good. This was Matthew's first impression of Moonlight Woodland. He looked around. He found himself in an open space that was similar to the oak forest in the real world. Not far away, there was an altar of the goddess of the moon. A proud owl rested on the stone tablet of the altar. The other party's gaze was not very friendly. Matthew felt a little strange. According to the instructions on the admission ticket, even if he was a necromancer, there should be many nature souls and spiritual creatures nearby. He should be able to gain the recognition of the locals through various performances. Only then could he become a member of the Moonlight Society and obtain some additional blessings. Did something change? Matthew tried to ask about it. However, before he could get close to the altar, a rude voice was heard. Evil necromancer, if I were you, I would turn around and leave without hesitation. People should at least have a sense of shame. I don't know how you got the ticket or how you coerced a kind nature soul to hold a ritual for you, but if you think that you can become a Moonlight's blessed just like that, then you are gravely mistaken. It was that owl. Its voice was like a little girl's voice. Matthew explained, I am indeed a necromancer, but I am not a bad person. The owl flapped its wings, and its voice became sharper. Bad people never say they are bad people. Get out of here, necromancer. I hate you. Matthew frowned. He had expected that the old-fashioned and conservative nature soul would have a bad attitude toward him because of his profession. However, he didn't expect that the owl wouldn't even give him a chance to explain. Miss Owl. He held his breath and patiently tried to persuade the other party. I think I've done things fairly and honestly. Wouldn't it be unfair if I were to be rejected just because of my profession? The owl flew up with a plop. Don't call me Miss Owl. I have a name. My name is Ella. Ella wouldn't trust a necromancer. Please leave immediately. As she spoke, she flew to Matthew's head, pretending to pounce on him. All right then. Matthew shrugged helplessly. Fortunately, he was already mentally prepared. The natives of the Moonlight Woodland were different from the newly ascended nature souls like Lulu. Although they still looked like small animals, they might have lived there for hundreds or thousands of years. The passage of time had made their thinking more stubborn. It would be euphemistic to describe them as inflexible. Not being able to join the Moonlight Society was not a big deal. It was just a spell sect. Matthew was about to leave. However, at this moment, a thin white light suddenly lit up on the altar. Hey, what are you looking at? The owl Ella bared her fangs and shouted, This is the grace of the goddess of moon, not something a necromancer like you can covet. Matthew shrugged. He didn't like the owl, but he couldn't be bothered to argue with her. Hence, he turned around and left. I dare you to take another look. If you anger the goddess of moon, I'm afraid she will punish you with lightning punishment, said Ella haughtily. Matthew ignored her and stepped into the secret door. However, at that moment, he heard thunder behind him. Rumble. Matthew was shocked. The goddess of moonlight couldn't be really that angry, right? He subconsciously turned around and saw a bolt of lightning fly out from the altar and strike the owl, Ella. In the next second, He appeared safe and sound in the oak forest. Lulu was nowhere to be seen. Did the goddess of moonlight's lightning strike the wrong target? Forget it, just treat it as a small interlude. Matthew adjusted his mood. He returned to the cottage and began his homework for the night. Outside the wooden house, Soldier was wearing a cloak of darkness, silently carrying out his patrol mission. The forest was quiet and peaceful. The night was silent. At daybreak, Matthew yawned and pushed open the wooden door. However, he was shocked to find a strange bird with black wings and cramped limbs resting on the oak tree 30 meters away from the door of the wooden house. "Good morning, Mr. Matthew." The strange bird greeted him uneasily. Matthew looked at her in hesitation. If it weren't for the fact that the voice hadn't changed, he wouldn't have been able to associate the strange, charred bird with the arrogant owl from last night. Ella. He sized up the other party with interest. "I'm sorry, Mr. Matthew. I only wanted to joke with you last night, but I didn't expect it to go too far. To show my sincerity, I will personally invite you to the Moonlight Forest tonight. If nothing goes wrong, you will successfully join the Moonlight Society and become a member of our harmonious and loving family." Matthew chuckled. He ignored Ella and went in to look for the sapling bag and tools. Then, he walked towards the pit he had chosen 2 days ago. "Mr. Matthew, Mr. Matthew." Ella hurriedly followed him up. "I'm busy, Miss Owl." Matthew waved the shovel and said, "I didn't think you were joking yesterday, and I didn't feel the sincerity of your apology today, so I don't think I should join the Moonlight Society." He started digging. The flying mud scared Ella so much that she screamed and flew away. But not long after, she flew back eagerly. "I apologize to you, Mr. Matthew. I know I was wrong. It was my ignorance that blocked my vision. I thought that necromancers were all bad people, but that's clearly not the case." Are you planting trees?" "Wow, what a great feat. You are the kindest necromancer I have ever seen." "Mr. Matthew, it was all my fault last night. I thought you were a necromancer who had mastered the nature domain, and I felt disgusted. However, I thought it through later. I believe you are actually a druid who has mastered the domain of necromancy. Isn't that much more pleasing? I can feel the natural affinity from you. How refreshing. Wow, Mr. Matthew, are you even so handsome when you wipe your sweat?" Ella tried to please Matthew. Matthew did not speak. He was just minding his own business. He worked from morning to dusk. In the evening, Matthew returned to the wooden house. A strange fluctuation surged in his heart. Your ability, nature's gift, is in effect. You have gained new abilities: heat resistance, tenacity, and sprint. Heat resistance. You become extremely insensitive to high temperatures and possess extremely strong fire and heat resistance. Tenacity. You have a stronger physique than ordinary people, constitution +1, toughness +1, sprint. You possess extremely strong sprinting abilities, especially in the chaotic streets of urban areas. You can burst out with twice the usual speed. Chapter 25. Moonwalker. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Thank you, Mother Nature. Matthew placed one hand on his chest and saluted in the direction where he buried Heiss. The 3 new abilities obviously came from the arsonist. And they were all very practical. Heat resistance can reduce fire damage, sprint made up for some of the mobility, and the constitution and toughness provided by tenacity were what Matthew dreamed of. Matthew remembered how Heiss managed to run hundreds of meters after being stabbed in the back that day. This arsonist clearly had more than one ability that could increase his toughness. Matthew was already content to get one. At present, it seems that nature's gift has no negative effects. For my senses, I've figured out that one oak tree corresponds to one burial. Matthew's mind started to work. Although he did not intend to turn the oak forest into a new cemetery, if he encountered a suitable corpse in the future, he would definitely not let it go. The only regrettable thing was, choosing nature's gift was equivalent to giving up the body of an undead creature. In a sense, Matthew sensed that this ability seemed to be trying to lead him to the right path, even though the method was somewhat strange. In the next few days, Matthew planted the trees diligently, and Ella followed suit. She looked at Matthew every day, hoping that he would change his mind. However, Matthew chose to ignore her. Even when she got too close, Soldier would suddenly jump out from a corner and stab her. This scared Ella so much that she flew all over the branches. Of course, Soldier had no intention of hurting her. He had only used Ella as a target to practice sneak attacks under Matthew's instructions. Every time he attacked, he would immediately activate the Dark Knight cloak and disappear. This made Ella feel worried, and she did not dare to approach the ground. However, no matter how Matthew threatened Ella, the owl did not leave. She tried her best to follow Matthew, trying to seize every opportunity to persuade him to join the Moonlight Society. Unfortunately, times have changed. Until the night 6 days later, Matthew finally found Ella and expressed his willingness to give her a chance, but only if Ella told the truth. "Why did you leave the Moonlight Forest to find me? I want to hear the truth." Matthew examined Ella's eyes. The latter retracted her feathers and shrank back. "This is the will of the goddess of moonlight. That day, I chased you away, but I was punished by the goddess like never before. She struck me with lightning 100 times and then drove me out of the Moonlight Forest. I have to bring you back. If I can't complete this mission within a month, my spirituality will be stripped away, and I will be banished forever. I will become a muddle-headed beast. Please, Matthew, I really know my mistake. For the sake of the goddess, please join the Moonlight Society." Ella begged. Matthew was deep in thought. It's really related to the goddess of the moonlight. She actually paid attention to me. Wasn't it said that after the ascension of the Heavenly Family Palace, the connection between the heaven realm and the material realm had become very weak? He thought about it. In the end, he decided to return to Moonlight Woodland to take a look. He knew very little about the gods of this world, and the goddess of the moonlight did not seem to exist in the game in his previous life. Now that he had the opportunity to come into contact with her, he could not miss it. As for the owl, Ella, with Matthew's magnanimity, he naturally would not continue to bicker with her. However, the necessary punishment was still necessary. "What? You want me to enlighten your oak forest once a month for a 3-year period?" Ella exclaimed, "Do you know how much energy I have to initiate enlightenment?" Matthew glanced at her and said calmly, "It wouldn't kill you, right?" Ella lowered her head. It seemed that she could no longer say a word. In the second half of the night, moonlight finally shone through the clouds. Under Ella's personal guidance, Matthew once again stepped onto the ground of the Moonlight Woodland. The moment he entered, 3 beams of moonlight flew up from the altar. It landed on Matthew. At that moment, it was as if he was bathing in a hot spring. All the pores on his body were relaxing. Hint: you have received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, Moonwalker. Moonwalker. When you walk under the moonlight, your intelligence and intuition increase by 1 point. You have received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, the Forest Guardian. Forest Guardian. You have a full amount of reputation and legendary points in the Moonlight Woodland. You will be able to go anywhere you want. You also have the ability to enter the Moonlight Woodland under the moonlight. You have successfully joined the Moonlight Society. Under the moonlight, your shape-shifting becomes a quick-cast spell. All attributes of shape-shifting +1. Wow! Matthew was amazed. This series of blessings came so suddenly. Apart from joy, he also sensed a faint sense of danger. What does the goddess of moonlight need me to do? He knew very well that there was no free benefit in this world. Ella, on the other hand, looked overjoyed. Congratulations, Mr. Matthew, you have become the first and only necromancer in the Moonlight Society. Although you are not an official member yet, thanks to the grace of the Goddess of Moonlight, you can enter and leave the Moonlight Woodland as you wish. Most importantly, my mission is completed. I finally don't have to worry about being expelled by the goddess. As she laughed, she actually choked up. Matthew patiently waited for her to release her emotions. Then, he asked the same question again. Or should I ask the goddess myself? As he spoke, he was about to walk towards the altar. No need, no need. I'm your guide. Let me pass on the will of the goddess to you. Ella spread her wings and flew away. Follow me, Matthew. On the way, I'll introduce you to what you need to do to become an official member of the Moonlight Society. Ella's voice echoed in the forest for a long time. Matthew noticed that the emblem of the goddess of the moonlight on the altar was gradually dimming. He followed Ella all the way. They passed through most of the forest. Along the way, Matthew saw many nature souls. They all had the appearance of small animals. Unlike the nature spirits he encountered when he was traveling in the oak tree domain, the natives of the Moonlight Forest were clearly lifeless. They were spirits that symbolized vitality and nature. However, in Matthew's eyes, they were not as lively as a skeleton soldier. The natives looked at him in astonishment. At first, they were surprised and disgusted. However, perhaps they felt the grace of the goddess of the moonlight, and most of them stopped for a while. After a long time, they looked at Matthew with reverence. Their expressions and eyes were very stiff as if they were forced to admire Matthew. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland doesn't seem good. Matthew noticed a detail. Along the way, he did not encounter a single druid. After all, even if humans or elven druids were busy in the material plane, there was a chance that druids would be born among the natives of nature's soul. However, he did not see any of them. This was very unusual. He quickly followed the cheerful Ella and told her all his questions. Ella lowered her altitude slightly. You're very sharp. There aren't many druids in the Moonlight Woodland. It wasn't like this before. I still remember when I was young, and when I was just born, the nature souls in the forest were full of vitality. Every forest was inhabited by druids. They would take the initiative to repair the scars caused by the passage of time. But then a disaster happened, and the forest suffered a huge blow. Many druids died, and no new druids were born in nature's soul. Didn't you ask for help from the outside world? Matthew asked curiously. Yes, Ella said with a sigh. We've asked for help from the Guardian Highlands, the Arctic Tundra, and the Azure Sea, but they rejected us without exception. Only a few young druids who were traveling outside were willing to help us, but their power was not enough to change the situation, so this place became what you see now. As they continued to go deeper, Matthew noticed that the trees on both sides of the forest were dying. This meant that Moonlight Woodland was being attacked by evil forces. Why did the Guardian Watchers refuse to help? Matthew found it strange. Ella flew down. She stopped on a dead pine tree and looked around. Times have changed, Matthew. Humans are getting worse, and the druids are no exception. Although their reason for rejecting us is that they have also been attacked by evil and are unable to provide support. But I know the real reason. It's because we are moonwalkers, and they are the favored ones of the earth. Matthew didn't expect that the druids would refuse to help because of their different factions. From the information he had so far, the Moonlight Society was an organization under the command of the goddess of moonlight, Asha. She might only have a very small amount of authority related to nature. Ever since the disaster that Ella mentioned, the druids who followed moonlight had almost gone extinct. The remaining druids on this continent were all members of the Earth Society, which should be an organization founded by a god who controlled the power of the earth. There was no doubt that the divine power of the god of earth was much higher than that of the goddess of moonlight. The authority he held would also occupy more weight in the field of nature. This was what led to the current situation. To put it in layman's terms, the Moonlight Society might have been glorious once, but it had fallen. Matthew could basically understand why the goddess of moonlight had punished Ella and treated him so generously. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland was so bad that the Moonlight Goddess was desperate. Only Ella, this idiot, dared to chase away the people who might be able to help. She chased Matthew away. It was little surprise that she was punished. However, I would probably be rejected by the Earth Society. Matthew thought again. We're here. 15 minutes later. Ella stopped in front of a dark cave. She rushed forward and said, "Your job is to deal with those disgusting bugs here. If you can kill a mad Zerg, you will become an official member of the Moonlight Society, and the goddess will bestow more grace on you." At the same time, the mission panel was also updated. Submission. Kill Zerg. Description. The Moonlight Forest is being invaded by the Zergs. Kill them all and then extort a sum from the Goddess of Moonlight. Reward. Goddess of Moonlight's Grace Ability, Battle Spellcasting. Chapter 26. The Ancient Tiger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Here, this is for you. Ella flew in front of Matthew with a badge the size of a bottle cap in her mouth. Matthew reached out and took it. He realized that it was a disciple badge of the Goddess of the Moonlight. Can I use it too? Matthew asked in surprise. Ella's tone was somewhat embarrassed. The goddess is magnanimous. Matthew could hear the sadness in the other party's words. I've already given you the badge in advance, just believe in it. He looked down at the badge. In front of it was a bright moon that broke through the clouds. On the other side was a forest under the moonlight. There were also the outlines of many small animals in the forest. It was a very conventional badge design. Asha's Smile, Divine Spell Badge, plus 30% movement speed under the moonlight. Description. Can cast moonlight 5 times per day. Even in a dark space, this badge can bring you moonlight. If the badge only provided the moonlight spell, it would undoubtedly be of little value. However, the buff of increasing movement speed was still very good. Now that Matthew had sprint, coupled with the effect of the divine badge, he wondered how fast he could run. Praise the moonlight. Matthew quickly put the badge on his chest and sang loudly from the bottom of his heart. Seeing this, Ella's originally low mood suddenly rose a lot. Thank you, Matthew. Well, there are a few things that I have to explain before entering the cave. Miss Owl said seriously, firstly, as your guide, I will be by your side from the beginning to the end when you deal with the Zerg race. However, I hope that you can protect me, because I'm not good at fighting. I don't want to enter the cave at all. But the goddess won't allow it. Please, Matthew, don't let me die. Where were we? Oh, secondly, this underground cave is extremely complicated. Not only does it belong to the Moonlight Woodland, but it is also connected to the material plane and some other unknown planes. There may be extremely terrifying monsters hidden in the depths, especially below the 10th floor. Therefore, we must be careful when exploring. Although the Zerg mostly only appear in the first 10 floors, sometimes people will go too deep if they are not careful. I hope you are prepared. Thirdly, there are a few druids doing the same job as you in the cave. The goddess doesn't want any conflict between you. In order to avoid conflict, she gave you the divine badge in advance. This is what those druids look like. They are all very nice people, especially this Miss Samantha, who is also a moonwalker like you. As she spoke, a few magic portraits of druids appeared before Matthew's eyes. He glanced at them. His gaze lingered on the female druid for a while. I'll remember this. It's not up to me whether or not something unpleasant will happen. Matthew chuckled and glanced at Ella. The latter lowered her head in shame. Then, she said solemnly, I'll vouch for you. These druids like me very much. With me around, they won't find trouble with you. So you must protect me well. Matthew replied indifferently, I'll try my best. Ella still looked a little nervous. She carefully stepped on Matthew's shoulder and asked, then, shall we enter the hole? Matthew shook his head. I'm afraid I can't go in like this. I have to go home first. Ella immediately became anxious. Don't tell me you want to. Matthew said frankly, as you can see, I am a necromancer. No, absolutely not. I can't let the undead creatures taint the moonlight woodland. Even if they took one more step in the forest, it would be blasphemy to nature and the goddess. Ella was jumping on Matthew's shoulder emotionally. Matthew had expected this. After she calmed down, he then asked calmly, if I don't have my summons, are you going to fight for me? Ella fell silent. In short, no. No, Matthew. Oh, fine. Hiss, I hate you, Matthew. I'm in. Half an hour later. In the dark underground cave. A row of skeleton soldiers was exploring the dark area in front of them in an orderly manner. Matthew walked in the middle. Ella was sitting on his shoulder with a resentful look on her face. The visibility in the cave was very poor. Fortunately, Matthew had prepared torches in advance. The two skeleton soldiers in front and behind each raised one, illuminating the surrounding environment. The terrain here was somewhat similar to the underground karst caves. They were both tunnels that extended in all directions. The only difference was the climate here was even more humid, as if the entire cave had been soaked in water for a long time. Matthew walked among them. The sound of dripping water and footsteps continued. However, most of the underground plants here were in a state of decay and withering. It was as if a force had taken away their vitality. Is this the Zerg? In the corner ahead. A skeleton soldier was using his forearm to dig out a purple conch-shaped meat shell mechanically. The meat shell was filled with yellow-green mucus and pus. He could still vaguely see the severed limbs of insect-like creatures. This is a destroyed hive. Do you see the mark on the wall over there? Ella tried her best to suppress her disgust. That is the crescent moon mark. There was a tick above the mark, which meant that all the Zergs in the vicinity had been cleared, including the hive. Matthew nodded. He had seen the mark long ago. It was obviously left behind by other druids. We have to pay more attention to this kind of mark. Ella entered the state of a guide. If there is an exclamation mark on the crescent moon, it means that there are many bugs nearby. There might even be wild Zergs guards. They are terrifying monsters. They are the elites of the Zerg race. The two of them continued forward. They left very smoothly. Apart from withered underground plants, destroyed hives, and a few traces of burning, they did not encounter anything new along the way. Very quickly, a Y-shaped intersection appeared in front of them. The terrain on both sides of the road sunk. Hint. You have found the entrance to the second level of the Zerg nest. Both caves led to the second level. But Matthew was not in a hurry to move. He could hear footsteps and conversation coming from the cave on the left. It's too narrow here, Samantha. My wilderness form is restricted, and we have to be on guard against being infected at all times. I have to admit that this is indeed one of the more difficult challenges I've received. It was a deep male voice. His voice was extremely magnetic and carried a faint majesty. So you understand how I felt before, right? You are the ancient tiger, Eli. If you find it troublesome, imagine how I must feel. The female voice chuckled and said, however, your transformation just now was indeed very cool. It's a pity that the Zerg guard ran away. Ha, do you think so too? Who's there? The male voice's smugness stopped abruptly. Not long after. A man and a woman walked out of the cave on the left. They were dressed in simple linen clothes. The man was tall and had an open chest, revealing well-proportioned and developed muscles and thick chest hair. The woman was tall and had a hot figure. Her eyes were very long, and her face had a wild beauty. "Hello, Samantha." The moment the two sides met, Ella greeted them. "Did you just come up from below? How's the situation down there? My underlings and I are going down to take a look." Samantha did not say anything. She just stared at Matthew. However, the tall man beside him said indifferently, "Samantha is the Moonlight Society's sole support, so the situation down there is a mess. The number of Zerg guards is increasing, and they are also very good at escaping. I just severely injured one, but unfortunately, it escaped." Ella looked at him in surprise. "You? Are you the ancient tiger of the Earth Society? The legendary Eli?" Eli smiled warmly. "I'm only a third-rank shapeshifter. I'm not worthy of the title of ancient tiger. You should wait until I complete my final hunting mission and demolish that evil dragon in the ice river will I be fit to use the title." Then, he turned to Matthew like Samantha. "A necromancer?" Samantha asked. Matthew nodded. "It's not what you think," Ella said hurriedly. "Samantha, Matthew is a good man. He's here to help us. You have to believe me, I will never compromise with evil." Matthew felt sad and amused when he saw her like that. He simply opened his mouth to help explain, "Not every necromancer is evil. On the contrary, I came here to get rid of the evil in this place. Truly an eye-opener." Eli sneered, his gaze sweeping over the skeleton soldiers. He seemed to want to do something, but Samantha stopped him. "Let's go." Ella urged Matthew into the cave. Matthew shrugged and ordered a few skeleton soldiers to scout ahead before he followed. He watched as the group of figures disappeared into the cave. Eli frowned and said, "You should have let me take action. At least, you should have destroyed those skeleton soldiers. How could we allow those undead creatures to taint the nature-sacred land?" Samantha shook her head. "Leave it be. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland Forest is indeed terrible. Is that why they're colluding with the necromancers?" Samantha looked a little pained. "You're right, Eli. I'll consider your previous proposal." Eli's eyes lit up. "You want to leave the Moonlight Society? This is great. With your strength and potential, our Earth Society has always reserved a seat for you. When are you coming with me to see the Great Elder?" Samantha said seriously, "Calm down, Eli. I once swore under the moon that I must help the forest eradicate the Zerg race. Even if I wanted to leave the Moonlight Society, this oath would not change. If I could not do this, I would never leave." Eli was stunned. Then, he revealed a satisfied expression. "Very good, such is the will of a woman I like. The Earth God will protect you, Samantha. When I go back and make my preparations, we will join forces and kill Queen Zerg. It's a pity that the situation at the Highlands isn't looking good either. Otherwise, I could have applied to the church to mobilize the sacred object. Sigh, as you know, the scar of the dead is getting worse." Chapter 27. My Job. You are listening at novelfull.audio. BDNVL.M, the male druid who was hostile to me just now, he's not from the Moonlight Society, right? The tunnel was filled with water. Matthew asked as he lifted his pants. "Of course, he's from the Earth Society. I've never seen him before, so I guess Samantha asked him to help." Ella said happily. Fortunately, Samantha held him back. Matthew smiled. Indeed. Ella obviously didn't understand what Matthew meant. She chattered about the story of the ancient tiger, Eli is an orphan. A long time ago, his parents had provoked an enemy and were chased to the west of the Guardian Highland near Storm Valley. In order to buy time, Eli's father died. Meanwhile, Eli's mother carried him in his swaddling clothes and crawled into the tiger cave to avoid the pursuit of his enemies. Unfortunately, his mother was injured, and she died after climbing into the cave. Before she died, she saw an aggressive but exhausted tiger. Eli's mother said to the tiger, "Eating me is enough for you to fill your stomach. Please let my child go." And so, the tiger silently ate her. The entire process, she didn't make a sound. Perhaps she fainted from the pain, or perhaps she was already dead. In short, Eli, who had memories of his childhood, witnessed this process. It was hard to imagine how he felt when he recalled this matter. After eating Eli's mother, the tiger took Eli to the depths of the cave. There, Eli found 2 tiger cubs that had their eyes closed. That's right. The tigress had just given birth. She was very weak and urgently needed to replenish her energy. If it wasn't for Eli's mother, she might have left the cave to look for food. Even if Storm Valley was the tiger's territory, it was still a very dangerous thing. The tigress, who had recovered her strength, began to feed her cubs. Eli also had a share. I believe you can guess the story behind it. Eli was raised by the tigress and received the favor of the god of earth in the process. His first wild transformation was a fierce tiger. Later on, through various fortuitous encounters, he mastered the transformation technique of the saber-toothed tiger and the legendary creature, the ancient tiger. His combat power was extremely terrifying and could not be measured by a normal Tier 3. Therefore, people had given him the title of a Tier 4 shapeshifter in advance, which was the ancient tiger. Matthew nodded his head after listening. A very rough life. Then did he help his parents take revenge? Ella thought for a moment and said uncertainly, I don't know. I think so. In short, he is very powerful. If you meet him underground in the future, it is best to avoid him. Matthew didn't say anything. His eyes were staring ahead. All the skeleton soldiers stopped in their tracks. Drip. 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 The sound of water dripping from the cave on the left was disturbing. And in that deathly silent atmosphere, the air in all directions suddenly became slightly agitated. Matthew! Ella belatedly exclaimed, they're coming. However, before she could finish her sentence, Matthew's robe instantly bulged and folded. In the next second, he turned into a raven and flew away. Hey, Matthew, wait for me. Ella was so anxious that her voice turned hoarse. Like Matthew, she landed on a horizontal stone pillar. When she looked down again, one after another, rat-sized Zerg larvae emerged from the darkness. They crawled like silkworms, their bodies covered in purple-green pus, and their speed was faster than ordinary people. Matthew! Ella couldn't help but scream, the most terrifying thing about the Zerg larva is its parasitism. As long as you wound them even a little, they can consume any living thing with parasites. We're finished. The battle below became more and more chaotic. There were more than a dozen larvae dealing with each skeleton soldier. Just as Ella was burning with anxiety, Matthew finally said, other than infection and parasitism, what other abilities do they have? Ella was stunned. Isn't this scary enough? Matthew looked at her as if she was an idiot. It is indeed terrifying to living creatures, but my summons are all undead. Can these bugs infect skeletons? As if to confirm Matthew's words. Suddenly, there was a sound from below. The two lowered their heads and looked down. A fist-sized larva crawled onto the knee of a skeleton soldier. Its body rapidly shriveled. At the same time, a large amount of pus came out of the larva's body and covered the bones tightly. Chirp chirp. A sound similar to a mouse's cry was heard, and more larvae gathered. They rushed to the place where the pus was flowing and were eager to give it a try. However, in the next second, a sharp sword descended from the sky. Whoosh! The blade sliced through the larvae bodies like tofu, and the pus exploded like juice. Skeleton soldiers did not use any skills. It only slashed its sword back and forth at the place where the larvae gathered, and a large number of larvae died. After it was done, it even touched its knees. After wiping off the pus, its bones were as bright as new. Hint. Your summoned creature is immune to the infection of the Zerg larva. Your summoned creature, skeleton number 3, has killed 13 Zerg larvae. Your XP plus 13, EXP accumulated. The battle continued noisily. Matthew sat on the wall and watched. Summoning his underlings to fight while eating popcorn was the greatest pleasure for a necromancer. Moreover, from the moment the first skeleton soldier raised his dagger, the outcome of this encounter had already been decided. Just as Ella had said, the most terrifying thing about Zerg larva was its pervasive infectious ability. Against this kind of infection, even high resilience might not be enough to resist it. This creature was the nightmare of all living creatures. However, it was different for the undead creatures. You couldn't infect a skeleton with parasites. Without the biggest threat, the Zerg larva was essentially no different from a larger rat. No matter how slow the skeleton soldier's reaction was, it could still kill a few insects with a single slash. What was more interesting was that the Zerg larva lacked intelligence. They seemed to be unable to judge the situation on the field and could only rely on their instincts. The battle was clearly one-sided, but they were still pouncing on the skeleton soldiers one after another. After a short 15 minutes, there were more than 100 corpses of Zerg larvae on the ground. Matthew's skeleton soldiers were almost unharmed. The reason for the word almost was because one of the skeleton soldiers had twisted its ankle when it was cutting the bugs. However, it was a skeleton. So Matthew could just twist it back after the incident. After this battle, Matthew found that most of the skeleton soldiers' soul fire had condensed a little. Undead creatures could also increase their strength through fighting and killing, but the progress was not obvious. Matthew was busy planting trees every day, so the skeleton soldiers had been ignored. Now that he finally had a chance to show off his skills, Matthew was quite satisfied with the result. So is this the goddess scheme? The undead creatures seemed to have a natural counter to the Zerg race that caused this place to wither and decay. Matthew thought. He didn't stay here for too long. After resting for a while, he ordered Soldier to continue leading the team deeper. Matthew and Ella were flying above, observing and commanding. The road was smooth. Other than the 2 infected humans on the 3rd level, they smooth sailing. The skeleton soldiers killed all the enemies without any injuries and emptied all the hives along the way. Although there weren't any large spoils of war, the occasional dozens of gold coins and the XP that allowed the skeleton soldiers to level up quickly made Matthew feel that this trip was worth it. As for the 2 infected bodies, one of them was ambushed by Soldier when they first met. The latter cut half of his body with a short knife, instantly making him lose his combat ability. The other one fought a straggling skeleton soldier. The fight was intense. The strength of the infected body was shocking. By the time Soldier and the other skeleton soldiers arrived, the skeleton had been mostly torn apart. This was also the first casualty Matthew had encountered while exploring the cave. What should we do? Matthew, you're missing a skeleton. Should we continue? Ella asked nervously. They were now close to the entrance of the 4th level. According to Ella, from the 4th level onwards, this kind of wild infection would become common. Of course, it was not necessarily the infection of humans but more of all kinds of animals. The infected body had the infection ability of a larva, strong strength, and good melee skills. Druids recognized them as troublesome creatures. What missing skeleton? Matthew chuckled. Then, he took out his withered wood staff and chanted at one of the infected bodies. Very quickly. Under Ella's surprised gaze, A staggering skeleton soldier stood up from the pool of red and green blood. So as long as there are corpses, you can summon skeletons endlessly, right? Ella's eyes widened. I guess so. Matthew added in his heart, the key is still my upper limit for summoned creatures. Alright, let's treat it as defeating evil with evil. Ella muttered. Matthew looked at her silently. She hurriedly said, then let's hurry to the next level. Matthew shook his head. No, today's mission ends here. Ella was stunned. Why? Did my words offend you? I'm sorry, Matthew. I apologize to you. I can finally understand the goddess wisdom. Necromancers are indeed more suitable for killing bugs than druids. Matthew yawned. No, it has nothing to do with that. There are only 4 hours left before dawn. I have to rush home to sleep now. I still have to wake up early tomorrow. Wake up early? Why did you wake up early? Ella didn't understand. Planting trees. Matthew said confidently. Don't you know that's my job? The next evening. Matthew simply refused the eager Ella outside the door. He sat down by the bed. Soldier's figure slowly appeared in the corner of the room. Matthew checked the progress of the planting mission. In the past week, he had worked overtime and planted a total of 104 trees, which naturally corresponded to 10 strengthening opportunities. He didn't hesitate and threw everything onto Soldier. 10 rays of light flashed, and soldiers leveled up 3 times, reaching level 9. There were also 7 new keywords. 4 of them were blue and white keywords. Your summoned creature, Soldier, has received keywords. Shadow Strike, blue, /poison, blue, /farming technique, white, /nurture the children, white. Chapter 28. Bondage Master. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shadow Strike was an ingenious attack. It could use the enemy's shadow to launch a short displacement and then instantly cause extremely great damage. Matthew made a straw doll for Soldier to demonstrate on the spot. The result was quite shocking. If Soldier's Shadow Strike hits you, not to mention fragile skin, even a close combat unit around tier 3 and below medium armor will have to shed a layer of skin. What was worse was that Shadow Strike was only the beginning of a series of combos for rogues after they got close. Take Soldier's Sword Dancer as an example. After Shadow Strike, it could immediately follow up with Burial Dance, a killer move with extremely high damage. It was very difficult for low-level adventurers to resist such sudden and continuous explosive attacks. As expected, when fighting with rogues, not letting them get close is the first rule. Matthew didn't think that Garcia's armor could last long when he was entangled by an elite rogue. In his opinion, magic armor was the last layer. When you were forced to reveal your last layer, your life was not far from being controlled by others. Of course, this did not mean that the last layer was not important. The other blue keyword was poison. This was a keyword that included a series of minor skills such as identifying poison, extracting poison, making poison bottles, and smearing weapons with poison. Due to his limited energy, Matthew knew very little about herbal medicine and pharmacology. Now that Soldier had gained such an ability, he could be considered to have made up for his shortcomings in this aspect. In the future, I can ask Soldier to collect poison and make more poison bottles. He can use them himself, and my crossbow will be more lethal. If Shadow Strike and poison were still within Matthew's knowledge. The last 2 white keywords were hard to understand. What the hell was farming techniques? Could it be that Soldier was actually a farmer when he was alive? Nurture the children. Did he raise small animals like pigs before he died? Or was he a man with rich experience in raising human babies? Matthew looked at Soldier in confusion. The latter still responded to Matthew's gaze with a blank expression. After a while, Soldier looked away. He found a spot in the corner of the bed and quietly sat down. Matthew felt a little helpless. I didn't expect that the gray keyword that had just appeared would take effect so soon. Slacking off, gray. Your skeleton has learned to slack off in non-combat mode. Fortunately, it was limited to non-combat states. If it would slack off in battle, then Matthew would have to consider whether he should give him all the subsequent enhancements. His gaze went past the gray keywords. The good news was, the last two keywords were both purple. The bad news was, these two keywords looked a bit strange. Shadow dance steps, purple. Your skeleton can quickly and violently twist its crotch to please and charm the target. At the same time, when it was dancing, a part of its dance steps could cross the shadow realm, thus achieving the goal of speeding up the approach to the target. Bondage Master, purple. Your skeleton is good at using rope skills, including binding, even when not in battle. Requirements. To prepare for this skill, please prepare at least a strong enough magic rope for him. So, what exactly does the sword dancer profession is about anyway? Matthew was deeply puzzled. He looked at Soldier again. The latter hesitated for a moment. Then, he got up and twisted his hips at Matthew. The air fluctuated slightly. Matthew's eyelids twitched. At that moment, he felt dizzy. Stop. He pressed down on Soldier's restless crotch. I understand now. The dance steps are indeed powerful. This should be infused with some kind of ritual spell. Matthew rubbed his temples in an attempt to wake himself up. If this continued, he would probably feel that the skeleton in front of him had become more beautiful. This was the effect of charm. His willpower wasn't low, and he was Soldier's master, but he was still affected. If it was someone else. Matthew suddenly felt a little more expectant. He sized up Soldier. He realized that this skeleton was very different from the others. His bones were full and strong, and there were a lot of silver light spots inside. Compared to other skeletons, he was cleaner. So clean that he was almost unstained. His entire body was covered with bones that were as white as jade and had silver edges. Have you bathed yourself? Matthew asked thoughtfully. Soldier was stunned. 10 seconds later. He nodded uncertainly. Matthew looked helpless. Soldier was good at everything. He had great potential, but his intelligence was too low. This was also a common problem with undead creatures. Even the powerful bone dragon Phily only had 4 points of intelligence. Of course, intelligence did not completely represent IQ, but those with low intelligence usually did not have much of an IQ. Soldier's current mental state was equivalent to a 5-year-old child. It was fine with Matthew's command. However, if Matthew let Soldier go alone, it would be 100% likely to cause trouble. It seems that Peggy is indeed extraordinary. As expected of someone I risked my life to find in the land of gold. Matthew's eyes were filled with nostalgia. However, very quickly, his memories were interrupted. Saber, Saber, me, Saber. A thought came intermittently from Soldier's soul fire through the undying contract. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. You want a good saber? A short one. 10 seconds later. 2. Soldier replied. I understand. I will forge 2 suitable daggers for you as soon as possible. Thank you, Master. This time, the response only took 3 seconds. Due to your promise, Soldier, skeleton, S loyalty to you has increased to 99. Those you nurture will be more loyal to you, after all. Matthew sighed. After having a simple dinner in the small wooden house, it was already dark outside. Matthew pushed the door open and walked out. A faint white light flickered in the oak forest not far away. The oak fairies that had been hiding in the dark during the day came out in full force. Except for Princess Lulu, almost all the fairies were dancing around Ella the owl. Ella was standing on the crown of an oak tree. Her eyes were tightly shut as she muttered something. Faint divine spells spread out like ripples. Matthew walked in the forest. The feeling of being watched by pairs of kind eyes came back. She was enlightening the oak forest. As a nature soul favored by the goddess of moonlight, Ella's attainments in the nature domain were much higher than Lulu's. Through the ritual of enlightenment, she could inject more wisdom and vitality into the oak forest. The oak trees became healthier as a result. And in the long process of growth, if there were someone to enlighten them, then there would be a higher probability of a tree spirit being born among them, which was what people often called the tree guardian. If they were lucky, they might even give birth to 1 or 2 tree shepherds. This was extremely beneficial to the development of the forest. However, it also meant a great consumption for the creature casting the enlightenment. Matthew's actions had been unpredictable. Ella was afraid that he wouldn't go to get rid of the Zerg tonight, so she fulfilled the promise Matthew had asked her to fulfill in advance. Hint. Your nature partner, Ella, has completed an enlightenment ritual for your oak forest. Your domain. Oak tree has received a slight upgrade. There was such a benefit. Matthew was overjoyed. Enlightenment could not only benefit the oak trees but also strengthen his domain power. Looks like I have to think of a way to get Ella to come over more after the 3 years are up. Matthew thought. The only uncertain factor was actually Lulu. As a nature soul, Lulu had obviously regarded the oak forest as her habitat. She could tolerate Ella coming here to cast enlightenment in the short term. But as time passed, she definitely couldn't take it. Because this would be stepping on her territory. Lulu should have a similar ability in the future, right? In his thoughts, the white light in the forest had already faded. The oak fairies vanished. Ella dragged her exhausted body to Matthew. Hey Matthew, I did pretty well, didn't I? Ella asked with her head down. Matthew nodded. He could feel the joy of the oak trees. Ella was obviously not slacking. Matthew's attitude naturally softened. You've worked hard, Ella. You did well. Ella said happily, then can we remove the Zergs now? Matthew shook his head. Under Ella's puzzled gaze, he asked, can you germinate? Ella seemed to have guessed something, so she nodded hard. I know, Matthew. That is the basic skill of nature's soul. I know what you want me to do. You said that your job is to plant trees, and I see you carrying saplings around every day. So, have you used up all the saplings? Matthew said approvingly, you're very smart. I don't have enough saplings, but I have a small greenhouse where I'm cultivating some oak seeds. However, if I follow the normal process, their germinating speed will be too slow, so I want you to help me germinate them. You don't have to ripen them all. Just a small portion will do. We can do it in batches. As for the specifics, it depends on your physical condition. After all, you have just completed a round of enlightenment. You must have consumed a lot of energy. Ella said impatiently, take me there. We don't need to do it in batches. I'll germinate all of them tonight. Matthew hesitated. Is this okay? Your body. Ella was full of confidence. Don't underestimate the perseverance of the nature soul, Matthew. Isn't it just a small greenhouse? I can still withstand it. 20 minutes later. At Matthew's house in Rolling Stone Town. In the greenhouse on the east side. Peggy looked at the shocked Ella with interest. Is this the little greenhouse you were talking about? Miss Owl said in a trembling voice. She looked at the endless mini greenhouses in front of her. Her vision turned black, and she almost fainted. The previous owner of this house left behind a ritual field with folded space here, but my magic power is insufficient, so I can only activate a small portion. Currently, it only has an area of less than 15 acres. Matthew said pleasantly, "Do you need me to introduce you to your future working environment in detail?" Chapter 29. You have my blessing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No, there's no need, Ella said. Matthew could only continue regretfully, "Maybe I was wrong with my wording, but for me, this greenhouse is far smaller than the one I have in mind. And I don't mind if you do it in batches. There's no need to rush." However, Ella showed unprecedented stubbornness. "No," she said seriously. "Matthew, nature souls will never go back on their words. Just you wait. After tonight, all the seeds will sprout." She flapped her wings and flew to the first seed shed. A faint natural aura spread out, and Ella began to work energetically. "Is she the arrogant nature's soul that you told me about before? She doesn't look like a bad person?" Peggy asked with interest. Matthew nodded in agreement. "Of course, she's not a bad person. In fact, most of the nature souls are very suitable to be friends. They're just blinded by the discrimination against my profession. However, this is not their fault. Necromancers do have a bad reputation. In fact, Matthew quite liked to deal with nature's souls, and he even liked most druids. Their emotions were all written on their faces. They were straightforward folks. One wouldn't need to worry about betraying around them. So now that you have this child laborer, does this mean that I don't have to be responsible for the greenhouse in the future?" Peggy asked expectantly. Matthew smiled. "Ella is only here to help. She's new here, and there are still many details that she doesn't know. She needs you to teach her." Peggy pursed her lips. "All right, I knew that you damn necromancers wouldn't let a free labor like me go so easily." Matthew smiled and handed over an irregular crystal that was emitting white light. "This month's salary." Peggy's soul fire instantly turned into the shape of a smiling face. "Oh, Matthew, you are the kindest necromancer I have ever seen. I bet other necromancers won't pay their salaries on time like you. When I was still in the Golden Pit, I had a friend who was a contract creature of an eccentric old man. He told me that the damned necromancer not only wanted him to be at the forefront of the battle, but he also wanted him to help take care of his everyday life, liking bathing him and so on. I also suspected that the necromancer had molested him. However, I had no evidence. Plus, my friend had no ability to resist because he had signed a contract. Every time we met, he would look for me to discuss how to get rid of that necromancer. Unfortunately, he did not succeed in the end. The last time I saw him was after a terrifying battle. At that time, he had almost lost all the important bones in his body. I was very worried about his condition, but he smiled and told me that it was not without good news. At least he wouldn't be asked to bathe the old man anymore. Later, it was proven that he was right, but only partially. That damned necromancer had indeed stopped molesting him. Instead, he removed all his bones before his eyes and gave them to the other skeletons. The excess bones were broken down into a bone powder, and even the last soul fire was used to light the lamp. How despicable. "Ah, I'm sorry, I've said too much, but I still want to say. Thank you, Matthew." Matthew listened quietly. "I only did what a man with a bottom line should do, so you don't have to thank me, Peggy. But what I'm curious about is, how did you know what happened to your friend?" Peggy hesitated for a moment, her soul fire swaying slightly. Maybe I have a telepathic connection with him. In short, I saw those images before he died. I thought that after becoming an undead creature, I would no longer be afraid of death, but that's not the case. I'm still afraid of losing myself. Awareness. Every time I think back to the scene I saw at that time, I feel terrified." At this point, Peggy's soul fire suddenly flickered intensely. Her voice was trembling. Matthew's expression changed. He quickly put one hand on Peggy's back. "Hey, Peggy, stop reminiscing about those unpleasant things. Do you still remember what I told you when I brought you out of the golden pit? We can do it. I've already established a good relationship with nature's soul, and even the goddess of moonlight has blessed me. I think I'm on the right path. We only need time to solve the mystery that has been bothering you. But before that, you have to be strong. You can't be defeated by yourself. Matthew said as he tried to calm Peggy's surging emotions. He gently hugged Peggy's cold skeleton. A wave of intense sadness surged into Matthew's mind. He gritted his teeth and supported Peggy with determination. This scene should have been beautiful. Unfortunately, there was a difference in height between the two of them. After a long time, Peggy was finally freed from that intense, sorrowful mood. Thank you, Matthew. You've helped me again. Peggy's soul fire gradually stabilized, and her tone also returned to calmness. It's been more than a year since I last felt that terrible feeling. I thought I had gotten rid of that nightmare, but it still didn't let me go. Matthew was already used to such situations. When he first signed with Peggy, she would get sick almost every week or so. Later, Matthew brought her to the material world to live, and she slowly got better. What did you see just now? Matthew asked softly. It's similar to last time. There are countless towering corpses on a boundless grassland. The ground is black, and the grass is dripping blood. Peggy said calmly. Perhaps that was the most memorable memory you had when you were alive. Matthew speculated. Perhaps. Peggy's mood recovered very quickly. She even took the initiative to joke about Matthew. You're hugging me too tightly. Matthew subconsciously let go quickly, but he immediately reacted and looked at Peggy with anger and amusement. Oh, Matthew, you're too gentle. It hurts. Peggy smiled proudly. But to be honest, I'm a little touched. If I weren't already dead, I would have married you. Matthew was about to answer. At this moment, the two of them simultaneously felt a shocked gaze staring at them. Matthew looked sideways. Am I interrupting something? Ella said in disbelief. Zerg Nest, 4th level. After a not-so-intense battle, the skeleton soldiers were slowly cleaning up the battlefield. Matthew, on the other hand, looked seriously at the dispirited Ella beside him. This stubborn nature's soul was forcefully taken away from her post after a quarter of the oak seeds had ripened. If Matthew didn't stop her, he was worried that the other party would die in his shed that night. Are you feeling better? Matthew asked with concern. Much better. Don't underestimate the recovery ability of nature's soul. Ella replied weakly. However, her mental state was much better than when she first entered the cave. The moonlight woodland was her home. Here, the energy she had consumed would be quickly replenished. That's good. Matthew chose his words carefully. Actually, what you saw earlier was a misunderstanding. Ella suddenly quivered. Matthew, you won't kill me to silence me, will you? She looked at him nervously. The goddess will keep an eye on you. Matthew rubbed his temples and said helplessly, if I wanted to silence you, I definitely wouldn't have waited until now. Ella let out a long breath. That's good, that's good. Don't take it to heart, Matthew, I understand. No, I mean. But I know that there are many necromancers who develop feelings for their summoned creatures. I have to admit that compared to the other skeletons, Peggy is a real beauty. At the very least, she still has all her bones. At this point, she paused for a long time before she suppressed some emotions and said, You too have my blessing. Congratulations. Matthew slapped his forehead. Now how was he going to explain himself? Master, there's a hardcover book. Soldier suddenly transmitted intermittent thoughts. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. He avoided the pile of corpses of the infected on the left side of the road. He came to the other side where Soldier was. There was a corpse of an infected human whose stomach had been cut open. Judging from the injuries, Soldier had done it himself. There was a hardcover notebook on the body, probably from the infected person's pocket. There were hundreds of gold coins scattered around the book, which meant that the infected person was once very rich. Matthew did not approach. In the hierarchy of the Zerg, an ordinary infected person was only stronger than a new larva, but an infected corpse was the breeding ground for more than a dozen larvae. After killing them, they had to be dealt with properly to prevent future troubles. Soldier, bring the book over. Matthew ordered. Soldier did as he was told without hesitation. Puff. A larva suddenly crawled out of the infected man's eye socket and jumped straight at Soldier's thigh bone. Whoosh. A sword shadow flashed. Soldier accurately cut the larva into two in midair. At the same time, he had also picked up the book. Matthew took the notebook, wiped the blood and pus on the cover with a rag, and then looked at it. The size of the notebook was only slightly larger than Matthew's palm. The cover had a pattern made of gold powder that looked like some kind of cuneiform text. Matthew felt that this pattern was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't recall it for a moment. He opened the cover. However, the blood-stained first sentence made his body tremble. The Empire ordered us to study psionic power on the dawn, but the terrible Zergs destroyed everything. It wasn't the content that moved Matthew. Instead, the word Empire finally triggered the association in his mind. He finally understood why the pattern on the cover looked familiar. Isn't this the symbol of the Unto Empire? I remember that the Unto Empire was the big villain in the game in my previous life. Almost all the monsters in the dungeon were related to their laboratories scattered all over the universe. Matthew's emotions surged. His previous judgment was correct. He had indeed transmigrated into the game world, or at least he was in the same universe as that game. Thinking of this, he couldn't wait to read the rest of the notebook. Chapter 30. Numbers against a Necromancer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There wasn't much content in the notebook. From the tone of the narrator, he should be a low-level researcher at a laboratory in the Unto Empire. His research is on psionic. It was an extremely powerful ability that was different from magic. It was mentioned in the notebook. The Unto Empire seemed to have captured a batch of experimental subjects that were very suitable for studying psionic powers. Unfortunately, the level of the narrator was too low, so he did not have the opportunity to come into contact with them. He did not even know what kind of creatures they were. He was in charge of the theoretical part. However, in the multiverse, only the proud and aloof Giza race held the supreme secret of psionic power. Although there were a few handwritten copies from the Giza people in the laboratory of the Unto Empire, their research on psionic theory was still in its infancy. However, the impatient upper echelons of the Empire had ordered them to conduct the psionic experiments ahead of time. After a certain experiment, a swarm of Zergs that came out of nowhere attacked the laboratory, and most of the people became infected by the violent Zerg. The dawn they were on had activated the self-destruct sequence immediately after the invasion of the Zerg swarm. It was under such circumstances that the narrator wrote his final words. Uni from Group 3 was also infected. She treated me to Pettigrew biscuits and took care of me several times at work, but I couldn't confess my feelings to her until the end. Looking at her twisted and crazy face across the glass, my heart ached for a long time until I saw her husband's infected body. Everyone is dead. I locked myself in the cold storage. I would rather freeze to death than become a zombie-like thing, but the cold air soon disappeared. I soon realized that someone had cut off the power supply, but who could have done it? A ghost. I don't know. I don't want to think about it either. I want to save myself. But I'm on a fucking starship that's wandering outside the Empire's territory. No one can save me. If I had known that the apocalypse would come so suddenly, I wouldn't have pretended to reject Baz when he invited me to a striptease show. F***ck. I suddenly remembered my childhood dream of sleeping with a large number of women of different races. How did I end up as a mediocre researcher? This is so sad. The above was the second to last page of the notebook. The last page of the book made one's heart tremble. I have a woman now, ha ha ha. She is very voluptuous and beautiful. Her charm is not inferior to Yuni's. The key was that it felt very comfortable to be with her. For her, I should pull myself together. We will definitely be able to escape and be together forever. This is my promise. My queen. The notebook stopped abruptly. Matthew's heart was creeped out. At the last moment of his life, was this researcher hallucinating, or did something shocking happen? Matthew did not know. He only knew that the other party would not be able to escape the fate of being infected. So, the Dawn is a starship. After becoming a hive, the starship crashed here for various reasons. Ella had mentioned that the Zerg nest was part of the Moonlight Woodland, the material plane, and other worlds. From this point of view, perhaps the swarm of Zergs had chosen this place as their landing point due to their consciousness. At this cross-section of many worlds, it was more convenient to infiltrate many worlds at the same time. Matthew thought calmly, combining the knowledge he had learned in his previous life. He silently raised the difficulty level of this hive in his heart. The instance dungeons created by the Unto Empire were definitely not that simple. According to Ella, the Zerg Guard was the strongest unit of the Zerg. However, Matthew was sure that there were more dangerous creatures hidden below. Creatures like the Zerg Queen or King. After all, the Unto Empire is famous for her hubris. Originally, it was prosperous enough to dominate an entire universe, but it set up thousands of laboratories and recruited a bunch of monsters, eventually causing the complete destruction of its own universe. Matthew shook his head helplessly. He put away the researcher's notes. At this moment, the skeleton soldiers had already piled up all the infected bodies together. Buzz. 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 Matthew sprinkled a handful of fiery dragon oil from afar. Whoosh. A small flame lit up. The pile of corpses started burning intensely. In less than 10 seconds, the infected and the larvae were burned clean. The flames dissipated. Only black marks were left on the ground. It burns fast and takes only a short time. The arsonist's fiery dragon oil is indeed a necessary tool for burning corpses and destroying evidence. Matthew praised in his heart. What was even more amazing was that the fiery dragon oil only left behind bones. As long as he needed it, he could summon more skeleton soldiers at any time. Matthew led the group forward. The area in front of them was empty. It was obvious that someone had swept through it. At the fork in the road, Ella rubbed her sleepy eyes and said, "These 3 paths all lead to the 5th floor. The only difference is the different entrances. However, you have to take note that below the 5th floor is the activity space of the violent Zerg guards. They are very terrifying and are not comparable to ordinary infected entities." Matthew nodded. If it was before, he might have chosen to move forward boldly. However, since he knew that this was the Unto Empire's doing, he would not charge forward blindly. The left and right roads have already been taken. It should be Samantha's doing. With her and Eli's combat power, it shouldn't be a problem to clear the local infected, but they won't have an easy time as I do. With that in mind, Matthew decided to take the middle path. Before entering the 5th level, he had to clear all the Zergs in his way. However, before he could give the order to the skeleton soldiers, intense footsteps suddenly came from the next tunnel. Whoosh! A yellow and black phantom jumped out of the tunnel. The moment she bumped into Matthew and the others, she cursed, "Damn it." Matthew took a closer look. It was a leopard. The leopard's forelimbs touched the ground and then bounced up. It walked upright like a human. The spots and animal skin instantly faded, revealing a beautiful figure. Return to where you came from immediately. I'll try to buy you some time. Remember, don't look back. They're here for me, but if you're discovered, I'm afraid you won't be able to escape. Samantha said hurriedly and crouched down on the ground. She didn't move, but in the blink of an eye, a lifelike leopard appeared in front of everyone. Samantha. What happened? Ella was shocked. It's the Zerg guards. I don't know why, but those Zerg guards actually left their territory to ambush me today. I almost fell for it. Hurry up and stop asking. The leopard shouted angrily. Then, without looking back, she ran back into the tunnel. Deep in the tunnel, all kinds of strange roars could be heard. Matthew, we have to help. Before Ella could finish, Matthew transformed into a raven and flew up to the top of the cave. Wait for me. Ella followed in panic. However, Matthew did not fly far. He only found a high platform where he could stand and observe the situation while deploying his skeleton soldiers. Fierce fighting sounds came from the tunnel. After a while, the leopard's figure appeared again. There were 3 bloody wounds on her body, one of which had worms crawling on it. Ella, why haven't you left yet? The leopard saw the owl in the stands and was shocked and angry. The skeleton soldiers moved very slowly. I'm afraid we won't be able to outrun the enemy. I want to know how many Zerg guards are chasing after you, Matthew said. Samantha was stunned when she heard Matthew's voice. Before she could respond, a large group of people rushed out of the tunnel. At that moment, Ella could not help but scream. Matthew was also shocked by the ugly appearance of the monster at the front. What kind of monster was that? It was like a monster made of countless human legs and bodies, but the joints were not sewn carefully. The iron wires barely held the joints together, and the Zerg larva crawled out one by one. Its skin was purple-red, and its speed was extremely fast. Wherever it passed by, there would be a large pool of yellow-green mucus on the ground, making people feel extremely nauseous. Violent Zerg guard, LV-10, and behind this monster were more than a dozen infected ones. This number had indeed exceeded the limit that the skeleton squad could handle under normal circumstances. Go. I'll stall for time. Eli will be here soon. Don't worry about me. Samantha shouted. As she spoke, she growled at the guard. After successfully attracting the other party's attention, she went around the terrain and played hide-and-seek with the other party. The skeleton soldiers were engaged in a battle with the infected. The scene was extremely chaotic. However, in this situation, the lack of individual strength of the skeleton soldiers was magnified infinitely. In less than half a minute, 3 skeleton soldiers were suppressed by the infected in a 1-on-1 battle. Beep beep beep. More footsteps came from the tunnel. The second violent Zerg guard quickly appeared in front of everyone. Unlike the first violent Zerg guard, which was almost entirely made up of human thighs, this violent Zerg guard had countless arms. They looked extremely evil. Soldier. Matthew shouted. In the shadows, a skeleton that was moving forward while twisting its hips suddenly attacked. Like a ghost, he appeared behind the second guard, and the short sword in his hand slashed out like a storm. In the blink of an eye, he had cut off all the stitches on the guard's body. Paw! The monster actually turned into a pile of minced meat on the spot. Hundreds of larvae jumped out. They shouted and pounced on the skeleton soldiers and Samantha. Very quickly, the space became too small for the leopard to bounce around. She was careless, and several wounds appeared on Samantha's body. Samantha, get over here. Matthew's voice came from the high platform. She glanced at Matthew. Matthew had returned to his human form and was holding a shiny magic book in his hand. She hesitated for a moment, and finally, under Ella's loud persuasion and the effect of the divine badge on Matthew's chest, she approached him at an extremely fast speed. 10 steps behind her, there were 2 infected ones chasing after her. You'd better have a way to escape. Otherwise, I can only take Ella away, the female druid said quickly. Matthew did not answer. He lifted the book slightly and started chanting. Puff. A group of mysterious magic words floated in the air. The 2 infected ones charged at them, but they seemed to have hit a wall, and their heads were bleeding. Not only that, but their bodies also began to weaken rapidly, as if a force was sapping their vitality. Defensive Psalm. You have cast the spell's rune of guard and protection from good and evil. Protective spell. Aren't you a necromancer? Samantha was surprised. Of course, I'm a bona fide necromancer. Matthew smiled. And you'll soon know why people say that you should never assume you have a numbers advantage against a necromancer. In the next second, Matthew suddenly let out a sharp syllable. In the chaotic battle, a lotus-like gray fog suddenly bloomed from the body of a skeleton soldier that was about to fall. A large amount of negative energy poured out. There was a loud bang. The skeleton soldier exploded. It directly killed several infected ones and even more larvae around it. However, the real explosion had just begun. You have used the spell Last Dance on skeleton soldier number 9. You have started using consecutive corpse explosion.